He was television's wild man, working without a script, without a net. Ernie Kovacs was a daring comic who would try anything once. None of his groundbreaking programs lasted long, but his influence on television did. Ernie Kovacs arrived in New York City just as Americans were buying millions of first TV sets, looking for entertainment and laughter. In an era of sitcoms and quiz shows, Kovacs had gorillas performing a ballet. He put on an entire show without words. He was equally skilled, of course, at spending money, eating caviar by the pound, flying to Cuba for cigars, playing high-stakes poker. Whatever he did, wherever he went, Ernie Kovacs always followed a personal motto: nothing in moderation.
And here he is, the star of our show, Ernie Kovacs.
Back when TV was young and impressionable, Ernie Kovacs introduced America to a brand new kind of monkey business.
The real smoked herring.
While most performers were adapting the comedy of radio and vaudeville to the untried medium, Kovacs set out in a direction that was bold, visual, and decidedly funny.
In television, God, he was so innovative and marvelously creative. He didn't just come up with ideas. He literally invented things that had never been done.
He sometimes seemed to me a classic case of a man born out of his time because he was primarily visual.
Oh, he could make you believe anything. I mean, he had this great charm on the air.
You're a killer. How did you stay married for 39 years carrying on like this?
And we had fun. We really did.
One of television's brightest lights was a man of inspired moments, both professionally and personally. Confident, creative, and unconventional, he scoffed at setbacks that would have discouraged others. But for a gifted comedian like Ernie Kovacs, life wasn't always a laughing matter. Ernest Edward Kovacs was born on January 23, 1919, in Trenton, New Jersey, a few blocks from the city's well-known farmers market, with the Delaware River and wharves at his back door. It was a first marriage for Mary Chebonic, a strong-willed and humorous woman, and a second for Andrew Kovacs, a Hungarian immigrant who brought a 7-year-old son, Tommy, to his new family. Ernie, a fun-loving kid, was the apple of his mother's eye. She would spoil him with extravagant gifts and amused him with movie matinees of Buster Keaton and Charlie Chaplin. While Mary doted on Ernie, Pops, as his father was called, turned to making a fast buck. In 1929, he began a prosperous career as a bootlegger during Prohibition.
Oh, it was totally illegal, of course, but money started to roll in. He was doing very well, and he got a big house and a car, and was really spending the money.
Pops was rarely without a thick wad of bills in his pocket, and much of his newfound wealth was spent on Mary's favorite son.
All this was lavished on him about what he wanted and what he needed, because he was a very spoiled child. When Prohibition was repealed, that business ended, and it was easy to buy booze anywhere and a lot less expensive. And they returned to their poor thing. The father never had another good job.
Ernie's parents opened a restaurant, but financial turmoil made for emotional strain. By 1936, the restaurant failed, Mary and Pop separated, and Ernie's high school grades had plummeted. Classes at Trenton's Central High didn't stimulate the precocious teenager who was becoming known as a class clown. While performing in the school chorus, however, Ernie found a sense of direction and a mentor in his drama coach, Harold Van Kirk.
Van Kirk really lit onto Ernie as somebody very special, and he encouraged him. Ernie felt, I guess for the first time, that something was possible for him.
Van Kirk believed there was more to Ernie than just a wisecracking kid, and he arranged a scholarship to a professional acting workshop in East Hampton, New York. Once enrolled, Ernie jumped into the antic world of the theater and never looked back.
He would build the scenery, and then they would rehearse the next week's show. Then they would appear in the current show. As the curtain would go down, who's deal? They'd play poker all night.
Kovacs left summer stock after 2 seasons with a modest acting resume and a growing poker habit. Another scholarship arranged by his mentor paid his way to the prestigious New York School of the Theater. The 19-year-old artiste felt he was ready to chase his dreams along the Great White Way.
Everybody then felt if I live in New York, I'll be a professional. He made the rounds with all the other young people trying to get work, but certainly not making any money.
For Ernie, the neon lights and grease paint of Broadway were as intoxicating as the bathtub gin his father had once sold. In 1938, he rented a tiny room in Midtown Manhattan and, with typical enthusiasm, began to burn the candle at both ends, dividing his time between odd theater jobs and his acting studies. But within a year, the young actor's poor diet and late-night schedule took its toll on his health. In the summer of 1939, 20-year-old Ernie came down with pneumonia.
He really got sicker and sicker until he had to go to charity hospital, where most of the people were not even like Ernie. They were like bums, and they were like destitute.
A mix-up in medical records landed Ernie in a tuberculosis ward. Already knocked to his knees by pneumonia and susceptible to infection, he contracted TB.
He goes in with pneumonia, which even then was certainly curable. But TB was really a very different thing.
As the months dragged on, Ernie kept his spirits up by entertaining his nurses with practical jokes and running a poker game in the hospital kitchen. Rescue came when Ernie's drama coach, Harold Van Kirk, learned of his situation and swiftly raised enough money to send him to a private sanitarium in New Jersey. A year and a half later, Ernie left his sickbed a changed man. He told friends that his illness made him more determined than ever to live life to the limit. Although he was too weak to pursue his theater dreams, Kovacs' faith in himself was unshaken. At 22, he returned home to Trenton and moved in with his mother, who was living above a penny candy store. Ernie found what work he could to support them both.
Well, he was selling cigars in Trenton in a drugstore. And he said that's how he got to learn about the good ones and the bad ones, and he liked the good cigars.
Then, on December 7th, 1941, Japanese bombs fell on Pearl Harbor and America was at war. Thousands of young men proudly stepped forward to join in the fight.
Army and Navy recruiting stations are stormed by hosts of American youth. The attack on Pearl Harbor has brought them thronging.
But Ernie, having just recovered from TB, could not enlist because of his weak lungs. The struggling performer scrambled to find a job on the home front.
One day, he came in and auditioned for the job of staff announcer at the local radio station, WTTM, in Trenton, New Jersey. He was given an ordinary news report, and with his own comments, it was hilarious. And he was hired right on the spot there.
Bake me some hotcakes and sausage.
Well, hi, varmints. All set for another batch of episodes of Daniel Varmint? Fine and good. Well, let's get right into that.
Ernie's keen sense of the absurd soon allowed him to bring his listeners a unique program never before heard in Trenton or anywhere else.
Since Daniel has been electrically charged, he now glows in the dark like a $2 alarm.
It became more and more talking and fewer records. And eventually, actually, it turned out to be a comedy variety show.
Although Kovacs' broadcast reach was small, he was becoming a local celebrity, and he did his best to live up to his new larger-than-life image.
He wanted everything top drawer. Even if he had very little money left, he would just throw it all out there and have one big dinner and where it was coming from later. And it always came.
In 1945, at the age of 26, Ernie met Betty Lee Wilcox, a 21-year-old dancer, And after a whirlwind romance, the two were married on August 13th. Within 4 years, the family had grown to include 2 daughters, Betty and Kippy. From the moment they were born, Ernie cherished his girls.
The thing that was most important to me was my father. There was a closeness, a bonding, a love that was so unconditional, that was something that was such a gift.
Parenthood was less gratifying for Betty. The former dancer resented giving up the limelight for what she felt was the yoke of motherhood. She also resented Ernie's strong-willed mother, who criticized her efforts at housekeeping and child-rearing. Betty soon withdrew into her own world of lost dreams, ignoring the children for hours on end.
My father had to run home from the radio show he was doing, and during the break, take care of me, because I wasn't being taken care of.
Despite trouble at home, Ernie continued to explore the outer edges of radio comedy.
Have you noticed, said young Tom, that Professor Arlington's skin rash has 11 legs?
And he also took a good hard look at a new invention called television. In the flickering glow of that round screen, he saw his future. In 1950, post-war prosperity and the baby boom created a nation of hungry consumers eager to buy into the American dream. That year alone, more than 7 million television sets were purchased.
When television first showed up, a lot of the big stars sneered at it. They had a point. It was pretty lousy for the most part. It's never gotten perfect in the meantime. But in those days, most shows were really awful, especially the local shows.
It always keeps itself frost-free.
So your Clark Gables and, those people wanted nothing of such small-time amateurish entertainment.
TV stations needed fresh talent to fill their ever-expanding broadcast day, and that left the door wide open for a young radio personality named Ernie Kovacs.
He sent in one of his shows into the nearby television station in Philadelphia. And as a result of that, he was given a cooking show.
You'd probably agree that the
television at the time drew heavily on radio's tradition of talk, but Ernie saw a new and exciting visual playground.
Working for your own show, eh? Huh? Yeah. Take a little bit of lettuce and gently drop it in here. Don't pad your part. I heard you sneak that line in. And you just get enough of this to...
A conventional cooking show just wasn't on the Kovacs menu. He quickly moved out of the kitchen and into a series of comedy programs showcasing his surreal sensibility.
A little more to the right.
Luckily, early TV had few rules, and so Ernie was free to make up his own.
I think at the time, especially at the beginning, people were still going, oh, wow, look at this piece of furniture in my living room. People are talking. We can turn it on and see people moving around. And he already taken that as a given. And he seized it and made it his own and twisted it inside out in every which way.
But Ernie's on-air merriment could scarcely conceal a home life that was crumbling. In the summer of 1950, after 5 turbulent years of marriage, Betty Lee packed her bags and walked out on the family. The busy comedian was determined to make a good life for his children and asked his mother to move to Philadelphia to care for the girls so he could concentrate on his new local morning show called 3 to Get Ready. This was a risky move for the NBC station, since nobody knew if viewers would want to watch TV at 7:30 in the morning. But Ernie created a winning collection of gags, gimmicks, and skits that launched his career as a true television talent. And when the popular puppet series Kukla, Fran, and Ollie took a summer break, the station scheduled the offbeat antics of Ernie Kovacs as its replacement.
Ernie, in Kovacs Land, a short program. It just seemed long.
Just a quick nickel. We don't have an awful lot of time. Thanks.
That show became very, very popular. He did things that had not been done in TV, taking the camera out on the streets and interviewing people walking by. And, I mean, that was just not done in those days.
Mr. Kovacs. Mr. Kovacs, wake up.
I think that the medium itself was dazzling to people, and the fact that he was dazzling within this new medium left a lot of people's heads spinning a little bit, and it was hard to hook into.
Beauregard, where are you? What's going on here? What is it? Why do I have to dream about turtles? There's Edie Adams, lives right next door. I could dream about her. I'll do it.
Another new addition to the Kovacs on-air mix was a 24-year-old singer named Edie Adams.
He just made me go out there and do things I would never have dared to do.
Well, here's the answer to those dingy, dull, and dirty-looking floors. A good all-round mop. And sort of swirl it around like this.
Go on, honey. Tell him you didn't take the jewels.
Raised in a strict Presbyterian home, Edie was caught off guard by Ernie's freewheeling approach to comedy and to life.
I had never seen anybody that looked like that. I mean, he was big and burly, and he looked kind of like a B-movie gangster, and he's got this mustache and a cigar and a foreign name, and I was like, I'd never seen anybody that looked like that, and I wanted one of those.
Step over here, Edie. I'll fix this guy. This kid would never take any jewels, and I know who the guilty party is. It's three-armed Louis himself. There's no doubt about it. He's the culprit, and he'll go away to the federal pen. Let's not get too serious, fellas. Something seems to have gone awry.
Edie became a regular cast member and quickly found a place in Kovacs' heart.
Ooh, what a dish. Second dish, Edie Adams.
Even though Ernie was still a married man, the charming Edie had caught his eye, and he went to great lengths to impress her.
He went out and bought a car so we wouldn't have to take a cab on the first date. I never heard of people like this. He was from the moon, obviously.
Kovacs was so sure of himself in the studio that he worked without a net. No scripts, no rehearsals. Within this creative atmosphere, he developed a brand new TV format, a viewer-friendly comedy show that included news, weather, and even an on-screen commuter clock.
The enchantment with the invention itself was part of the big first wave, and Ernie Kovacs was like a kid with a big set of trains.
Over here, you turn your set on, of course. You get to your horizontal picture, and you turn it just a little bit. Now watch, see, watch what happens. Not too much. No, that's all right. Now you're going the other way. Wait a minute. Okay, that's fine.
We had nothing else to go by. We were just inventing this as we went along. Ernie would come in, and I remember once he said, just bring a trench coat. We're doing a spy bit tomorrow. That was it. But then you had to be ready to do anything, like a boxer. What was he going to do next?
Let's see if we got some mail, shall we? Well, sir, grand. I'll go back here. That's quicker this way. I'll go here. Let's destroy the illusion a little, huh?
Often, Ernie's impromptu creations led to memorable characters, like poet laureate Percy Dove Tonsils.
Our prop man came in with these weird glasses, and Ernie would comb his hair forward and make 2 spit curls, and he was always there with a book of poetry, and behind which was a martini. And sometimes they put many things into that martini.
Somebody seemed to have slipped a little fish into my martini. No, I don't suppose he'll drink too much, and he can't get the olive in his mouth.
But it was Ernie's clever use of television's visual possibilities that kept viewers on their toes.
Somebody, Andy McKay, had this orange juice can, and he taped it to the lens, and then onto the orange juice can, he taped a kid's kaleidoscope. And God, we had 6 minutes killed there. You know, that was wonderful. And anybody that walked in the studio got on.
Now, these are horns.
If they were delivering something, they were on, much as David Letterman does with the people next door.
By the fall of 1951, 32-year-old Ernie Kovacs was settling into a comfortable routine. The Philadelphia studio had become a second home, and even his daughters took part in his happy workday. In 1952, however, NBC revealed plans for a national morning program. They called it The Today Show, and they chose Dave Garroway to host instead of the less conventional Ernie Kovacs, who by now had developed a loyal but small audience. Not only did the new program borrow from Ernie's wacky approach to morning comedy, it also took over his time slot. Ernie was bumped off the air.
Ernie was not alone in having a troubled relationship with network executives. That's been true of a good many comedians. In recent years, David Letterman has had many an on-the-air and off-the-air comment, too, about his problems with the network. Sometimes the interference you would get was, I must use the word, stupid.
That didn't bother Ernie. He was always brimming with confidence and concepts for new shows. But even an inspired comic can't predict life's punchlines, as Ernie Kovacs would soon find out. And offered audiences much of the same lunacy that Three to Get Ready had pioneered.
You can build your own cyclotron at home. The little Kapusta cyclotron kit now makes it possible for you to build your own cyclotron in the guest bathroom.
He was always doing the unexpected. And the next day, everybody was talking about, did you see Ernie's show? I think every show that Ernie did was, to use the expression, they were far out. They were different.
While Ernie enjoyed success in New York, he also wanted to settle matters with his estranged wife, Betty Lee Wilcox. He had filed for divorce and was fighting a custody battle for his children in a Philadelphia courtroom. For nearly a year, Ernie shuttled between New York and Pennsylvania for hearings until finally the court made a most unusual decision.
He got custody of the children in Pennsylvania, which was absolutely unheard of in those days for a man to get the custody.
Ernie's plans for a quiet holiday with his children were interrupted when CBS handed him the biggest break of his career so far, his first primetime network show. CBS gave Ernie only 8 days to prepare, and if that weren't difficult enough, he was to go up against TV's biggest star, the man they called Mr. Television, Milton Berle. But for Ernie, who thought he could do a week's work in a day's time, the challenge was welcome.
And now here's the star of our show, Ernie Kovacs.
He threw everything he could at Berle, routines he had been polishing for years, as well as his best new material.
I think you've got the idea all right. You've got the blindfolds on. It should be pretty easy. But just to make it a little bit harder, I'm going to shoot Mr. Kozlowski in the arm.
But there was no toppling the mighty Milton, and Ernie's show was canceled after only 3.5 months.
When all of a sudden, I was so beautiful.
I don't think anybody ever watched our show because while we were on CBS at 8 o'clock, Berle was on NBC at 8 o'clock, and everybody watched Uncle Milty.
Such professional setbacks never fazed Ernie, who continued his morning show and prepared fresh program ideas for CBS. But nothing could prepare him for what would happen on a warm July day in 1953. Ernie dropped off his girls for a visit with their mother. And when Kippy, now 4, and Betty, 6, were not returned, Kovacs feared his ex-wife had kidnapped their children.
Ernie was devastated, but He was very determined to get those children back. And he had not the slightest clue of where in these United States they were.
Kovacs suspected that Betty Lee had taken the girls to Florida, and each weekend he and his father crisscrossed the state's backwater towns with no luck. He even hired private detectives and spent $6,000 in fees, all to no avail. Initially, the police had been kept out of this very private matter. Ernie searched in vain for 3 months before he finally filed charges with the authorities. In the meantime, creative differences with his bosses at WCBS had forced a parting of the ways. Ernie jumped to Dumont, an upstart fourth network which had faith in the quirky entertainer. The 35-year-old star remained as fiercely dedicated to finding his children as he was to discovering new comedy ideas. When Dumont gave Kovacs a choice late-night time slot opposite popular host Steve Allen, the good-natured rivalry between the two prompted Ernie to do some of his best work.
I don't know if we're on color or not tonight, but in case you just have a black and white set and don't have color, and we are in color...
You would say, we're not photographed radio, we're not photographed vaudeville. They have not gotten up to go out and see you. You're in their living room on a little 12-inch screen. And they better like you. Because they're sitting there in their underwear. They're not dressed.
In April of 1954, Ernie introduced viewers to what would become his signature comedy creation, the Nairobi Trio.
He said, okay, Edie, you sit over there, you're on piano, and I'll sit here, I'm conducting. And he counted those things out. It didn't take more than 20 minutes. Everything was done that quickly. There was no thinking about it.
Edie Adams continued to appear on the show with Ernie, and after a 3-year courtship, the two were married on September 12, 1954, in Mexico. In typical Kovacs fashion, the vows were read in Spanish, which neither the bride nor the groom understood.
He didn't like to plan things. Very spontaneous. And everything was so unexpected that everything was like a party.
This is Leroy, W. Bascom McFinister. With the news, behind the news, behind the news, behind the news.
While the Ernie Kovacs show proved popular with late-night viewers,
things were really whirling today in Union City, New Jersey.
Dumont as a network was struggling, and in April of 1955, the company's television operation went dark. But Kovacs was confident that his faithful audience would support him on whichever network he chose. The question was, which network would choose Ernie Kovacs? In April of 1955, 36-year-old Ernie Kovacs' costly search for his children was about to come to an end. After spending $50,000 for private detectives and initiating a nationwide police search, it was a 2-cent postcard sent by Ernie's mother that would solve the case. While her son was exhausting his resources, Mary Kovacs put her pennies to work, sending out postcards throughout the South, describing the girls.
Grandma Kovacs, she was sending out pictures, and finally they did find them in Florida, and he and his father went down to pick them up.
After being separated for almost 2 years, Ernie was reunited with his children.
When I saw him, everything just fell away, and he turned to me and he said, Kippy, I see you're still sucking your thumb. And I said, I see you're still smoking your cigars, Daddy. That's the earliest true memory of my father. We got everything we wanted as children once he found us. I mean, it was an erratic but a wonderful time.
In October of 1956, 4 years after he had left the network, NBC again called upon Ernie, this time to fill in for Steve Allen 2 nights a week on The Tonight Show.
I said you could use Ernie Kovacs or Jack Paar. I mentioned those 2 specific names, and they tried both guys, but Ernie was quite individual because he didn't come out of nightclubs. He wasn't a stand-up guy. If he ever did stand up, I never heard about it.
But the unconventional Kovacs was more interested in creating electronic comedy using up-to-the-minute TV technology.
Time now for the secret message. Quit mugging it up. Time now, scene stealer. Time now for the secret message. Tonight, boys and girls, set your decoder pin at B12.
NBC awarded Jack Parr The Tonight Show and tossed Ernie a tough assignment. A network time slot was open following a much-anticipated Jerry Lewis special. Now, no comic wanted to follow Lewis, but Ernie, inspired by silent film comedians whom he loved as a child, gave the network The Silent Show. The Silent Show, built on music, sound effects, but not a word of dialogue, won Ernie industry-wide acclaim. NBC praised the effort, but felt the one-shot special was too off the wall to merit development into another Kovacs series.
I think that they were baffled. They acknowledged that he was a great talent. They probably heard that he was a genius. And they go, geez, you know, how can we not put a genius on television?
Ernie was a little bit ahead of his time because people weren't quite ready for his brand of humor. It was so offbeat and so unique.
But by now, Ernie Kovacs and his brand of humor had become recognizable icons. And The Silent Show had captured the attention of Hollywood. When Columbia Pictures chief Harry Cohn offered Kovacs a 4-year contract at $100,000 a picture, no offer from television could hold him back. In April of 1957, 38-year-old Ernie was off to Hollywood to start production on his first film, Operation Mad Ball.
I'd like to show you some exciting scenes from Operation Mad Ball. Moxie?
The film co-starred Jack Lemmon, and the two became fast friends.
It was great fun. I remember that my biggest problem was not breaking up at Ernie.
You are assigned as of now to the mortuary. Report to Sergeant Wilson for instruction. Hogan, you will have custody of the cadavers. Picking up same at the receiving office, dispatching same to Graves registration.
Thank you, sir.
And if you foul up just once, I'll hit you with everything in the book.
Yes, sir.
Dismissed.
Yes, sir. At one point, Ernie found that the corpse was suddenly coming to life.
This man's alive.
I had a hell of a time just sitting there and not cracking up at him.
Hogan, this can be a black eye for the whole United States Army, understand?
After Operation Mad Ball, Kovacs and Lemmon joined forces again in a big-budget comedy about urban witches, Bell, Book, and Candle, with Kim Novak and Jimmy Stewart.
Ring the bell, close the book, quench the candle. That's how they used to exorcise them, put them out of business in medieval times, of course.
When he came out here, everybody adored him because he was fun, and he was funny, and he was extremely talented.
The largesse, the whole idea of Hollywood. He just bought the whole thing.
Ernie's film work capitalized more on his personality than on his talents as an innovator. Nonetheless, he was bewitched by Hollywood's charms. In 1958, Ernie purchased a house in Beverly Hills and remodeled just for the fun of it.
You know, his wine cellar wasn't as good as he wanted it to be, so what he then did was get the prop department from Columbia to come up and put cobwebs all over the wine bottles.
Kovacs' extravagant lifestyle, however, was draining every penny he made. Not wanting to worry Edie or the children, he hid the fact that he was in serious financial trouble.
I did what I call my old wet nails act. Do that, pick that, whatever. I didn't know what was going on, nor did I care. I could go charge whatever I wanted. It was wonderful.
On June 20th, 1959, the family grew to include Mia Susan. And that summer, Columbia Studios released It Happened to Jane with Jack Lemmon and Doris Day, directed by Richard Quine.
Dick Quine, the nut who directed It Happened to Jane, insisted I change my appearance to look more like an aging millionaire. You know, more money in the pocket and less hair on the head. Well, anyway, I resisted, see?
But a job's a job.
Once again, Hollywood exploited Kovacs' unique personality instead of his acting ability.
Take a good look at that beaver pelt. It's the last either of us might see of it.
In one publicity stunt, Jack Lemmon was only too willing to help with Ernie's cosmetic makeover. Although Kovacs' generous salary bought plenty of Hollywood-style fun and permitted him leisure time to play golf with friends like Jackie Gleason, Ernie was gambling away a good deal of his money. That forced a return to the small screen on the weekly quiz show, Take a Good Look, sponsored by Dutch Master Cigars.
The sponsor would let him do whatever he wanted to do, and he was just as happy as he could be.
Good evening. Welcome to Take a Good Look.
He didn't like rules. He liked to make them as he went along.
Kovacs also continued making films, spoofing spies in Our Man in Havana, donning a uniform for Wake Me When It's Over, and in North to Alaska, Taking It on the Chin from John Wayne.
I'm not interested. Well, you're going to get interested.
But in 1961, the party came to an end
You got a match?
Yeah.
Frank, get rich.
when a new law put high-income Americans like the Kovacs in a 91% tax bracket. The Internal Revenue Service showed up at the Kovacs' home claiming they owed more than $500,000 in back taxes. The couple disputed the amount and fought bitterly to have it reduced. As the battle raged on, Ernie refused to pay what the government said he and Edie owed.
He spent what he got, which is why he never wanted to pay taxes. He thought that that was totally unjust and ridiculous, and so he just didn't do it.
Then on March 16th, 1961, ABC broadcast the final Take a Good Look. While the show sold a lot of cigars, its ratings were lackluster at best. Now, after a decade on television, Kovacs was ready to get behind the camera. This magician of the medium was about to treat audiences to his finest work ever. In the 1960s, Americans set out for a new frontier. The Kennedy era promised new horizons and a streamlined future. And if America was ready for a trip to the moon, maybe it was ready for Ernie Kovacs. In 1961, Ernie began a series of monthly specials sponsored by Dutch Master Cigars. Directing the madness from behind the camera, Kovacs devised some of the most innovative camera tricks in television history.
Camera-wise, Ernie came up with a lot of crazy ideas. The crew would bend over backwards. They would do anything possible to reach the point that Ernie was expecting.
No longer locked into the daily grind of live television, and with time to craft a work of comic art, Kovacs had finally hit his creative stride. If he wasn't in the studio taping or editing a show, he was locked in his study for days at a time, planning or writing his next one. On January 12, 1962, after finishing work on his 8th special for Dutch Masters, an exhausted Ernie drove home to get ready for a party at Milton Berle's.
He came home from work swearing and angry. I said, Danny, what's wrong? He said, oh, I have to go to this party and I have to work tomorrow and this and that. I said, well, don't go. He said, I gotta go.
Ernie met Edie at the party, and later that night it had started to rain. Ernie let his wife take the family Rolls-Royce home while he drove their Corvair station wagon. While driving along a wet road, Kovacs missed a turn and lost control of his car.
I got home, and usually, no matter which car anybody took, he was there first. And this time he wasn't there. And then it got later and later and later, and then the police called. I said, no, wait a minute, who was calling? What is this all about? And I heard the man put his hand on the phone, and he said, "It's Mrs. Kovacs. What'll I tell her? He's on his way to the morgue." And I just lost it.
What they think happened is that he was going too fast, and apparently he had been trying to light a cigar. And the car drifted over, he slammed the brake, and it had been raining a little bit or something, but the car skidded and hit sideways against the phone pole, which threw Ernie over, and he hit his head, and that's what killed him.
At only 42 years of age, and at the height of his career, Ernie Kovacs was dead. News of the tragedy spread quickly throughout Hollywood. The community gathered to pay their respects and to share their shock and grief. His pallbearers included close friends Jack Lemmon and Dean Martin. Ernie's final special was aired only 10 days after he died on January 23rd, what would have been his 43rd birthday. In the spring, he received his only Emmy for outstanding electronic camera work in a comedy special. Edie took it upon herself to sort through the family's tangled finances, and she was determined to pay off the Kovacs' debts by singing in nightclubs and appearing in cigar commercials.
Why don't you pick one up and smoke it sometime?
She also bought back the rights to many of the shows he had fought so hard to create. In its infancy, television had many pioneers, but few had Ernie Kovacs' mischievous vision of the new medium. He saw what TV was and could be, and helped open doors for a new generation of comedy innovators. Before there were shows like Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, Saturday Night Live, and Late Night with David Letterman, there was Ernie Kovacs.
One of the things about the truly original comedians is their work has a freshness which persists. Even if this show is seen after the year 2000, you can still make that statement.
There was a mad scientist aspect to him, you know? A mad scientist who happened to smoke a cigar and I guess didn't sleep much.
He was very childlike in his demeanor, and that was part of his attraction. That's one of the reasons why he was such great fun to be with.
He was funny. He made me laugh. But, you know, more importantly, he showed me how to love.
Yeah.
He was fun to be with. I learned how to have fun. I can't imagine what my life would be without him.
At his most outrageous peak in 1957, Ernie Kovacs and his trademark cigar once graced the cover of Life magazine. Well, purely by coincidence, the date of that issue was April 15th, Tax Day, the most dreaded day of the year in the Kovacs household. Soon after Ernie's death, several of his friends offered to produce television specials to try to help repay some of his massive debts. Edie refused, said Ernie would have been embarrassed to receive charity. Instead, she did her own specials and finally paid back all the money he owed.